She knocked on his door in the rain, holding a baby, and said, "He's yours." Montana, 1870. The rain did not fall, it crashed, poured in sheets that bent pine boughs and filled wagon ruts with rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the mountain ridges like the hoofbeats of something ancient, and the wind sang low through the cedar trees like a sorrow remembered too late. Sadie stood beneath it all, her shawl soaked through, hair clinging to her cheeks, boots heavy with grit and water. In her arms, wrapped in a woolen blanket, was a boy no older than 3. His eyes were closed, dark lashes wet against his copper-toned skin. She tightened her grip on him and stepped closer to the wooden structure ahead, its faint light flickering behind a buffalo-hide flap of a door. She raised her hand, hesitated, then knocked. The door opened before her second knock could land. The man who stood there filled the frame, his bare shoulders glistening with firelight and raindrops from where he had just stepped outside. Long hair, black as coal, fell past his shoulders. His gaze caught hers, and the silence that fell between them was not born of surprise, but recognition. Sadie did not flinch, she did not tremble. "You do not have to believe me," she said, her voice calm, though the wind caught the last word and tried to steal it. "But this boy, he is yours." Neshoba did not move. For a moment he looked not at the child, but at her. At the woman he had once pulled from a burning barracks, who had stitched the wound beneath his ribs with trembling hands and whispered songs in a language not her own. At the woman he had thought lost to time and memory, swallowed by the world he had fled from. The boy stirred, a soft whimper lost in the storm. Sadie shifted to shield him from the wind. Behind Neshoba, voices stirred. A woman's voice, sharp, suspicious. "Winyan." Sadie had seen her once, years ago, though not up close. Now she stepped into view, wrapped in a blanket of dyed elk hide, her black eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "Who is she?" Winyan demanded, looking past Neshoba to the drenched woman and child. "Why is she here?" Sadie's gaze did not leave Neshoba's. She waited. He stepped forward finally, down one step, into the mud and rain. He stopped less than a foot from her, his breath clouding between them. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice low, not unkind, but full of a weight he could not name. "I looked for you," she answered, "but after the war there was nothing. I had no name, no tribe, no place to send word. They told me you were dead." "And the boy?" he asked. "His name is Isaac," she said, glancing down. "He was born in the winter after you left." He looked then, finally, really looked. The child's features were soft, round with sleep, but there was no denying the curve of the brow, the shape of the nose, the skin that spoke of a bloodline neither north nor south. Neshoba's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked away, as if the weight of truth had pressed too hard against something he had tried to bury. "I did not come here to ruin anything," Sadie said, sensing the tension behind him, the presence of the other woman, watching. "I only came because he deserves to know." The boy stirred again, this time murmuring something half-formed, a sound like "Ma." Sadie cradled him closer. Winyan stepped forward then, her voice sharper. "She lies. She sees who you are now and wants to steal what is mine." Sadie turned her head slowly, eyes narrowing, but she did not speak. Her silence was colder than any insult. It held the weight of all the winters she had endured alone, of every night she had tucked that child in with stories of a father who had once been brave. Neshoba raised a hand, silencing both women. His fingers trembled slightly. "You need shelter," he said to Sadie. "You cannot stand here in this storm." "I am not here to beg," she replied. "I know," he said. He looked down once more at the boy in her arms. "But he should not sleep in the rain." He turned, then paused. "There is a healer's tent, empty near the river bank. It has a hearth and dry straw. You can stay there, tonight." Sadie nodded once. "Thank you." Without another word, she turned and walked in the direction he had pointed, disappearing again into the mist and pine. Behind him, Winyan's voice cracked the silence. "You would give her shelter?" "I give the child shelter," he said. and he stepped back into the lodge, but the fire behind him did not warm him. Not that night. And somewhere down by the river, a woman laid her son to sleep on straw, staring into the fire alone, her heart still beating where his hand had once been. It began in the summer of 1865, not long after the war had turned from strategy to survival. Sadie wore a nurse's armband, though the cloth was stained and the stitching frayed. She had come to the Confederate detainment camp in northern Texas with nothing more than a promise of work and the conviction that kindness was still possible in a world drowning in blood. The prisoners were men of many nations, runaways, rebels, and those simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But among them there was one who never spoke unless spoken to. Nashoba, Cheyenne. Captured during a skirmish near the Pecos River, his name whispered like the wind, soft, untranslatable. At first, Sadie paid him no more attention than the others. He was taller than most, with quiet eyes that never begged, never flinched. But one morning she found him cradling a fellow prisoner in his arms, a boy no older than 17, moaning from a gangrenous wound. Nashoba dipped a rag in cold water, wrung it out with hands calloused but careful, and sang low, in a language Sadie didn't understand. She froze in the doorway, bowl of salve in hand, and listened. From that moment she began to notice him more. How he helped a fevered man sit upright, how he carved small toys from discarded wood scraps and passed them to the children imprisoned in the rear quarters, how he looked at the stars, not as if lost, but as if remembering where he had come from. One night, a shipment of liquor meant for Union guards was stolen. Tempers flared, guns were drawn. Some guards turned on each other, drunk and delirious, looting supplies and dragging women from the tents. Sadie was pulled from her cot, her hair ripped loose, hands bound. She fought, bit, screamed. And then he came. Nashoba's shout pierced the dark like a war cry. He charged from the shadows, unarmed but unafraid. One of the soldiers raised a blade. Nashoba took it to the ribs but didn't fall. He tackled the man, fists flying. When it was over, Sadie lay trembling beneath the shelter wall, her dress torn, her cheek bruised. Nashoba collapsed beside her, blood darkening his shirt. She dragged him to the infirmary. No one helped. No one followed. Outside, the world burned in drunken rage, but inside that tent, there was only the sound of her whispering his name and the trembling of his breath. She stitched his wound with hands steadied by fear, and something else, something unnamed. "You should have run," she murmured. His voice was hoarse. "I could not leave you." It was not love yet, not in the way stories tell it. It was something quieter. A hand brushed against hers when she passed him water. A gaze held a second too long across the firelight. The way he said her name once, just once, as if tasting it for meaning. They made love on the cot where the clean sheets were kept, with no vows, no promises, just the warmth of two bodies desperately human in the eye of inhuman times. By morning the sky had turned orange with cannon smoke. The camp was overrun by Union troops reclaiming order. In the chaos, the prisoners vanished. Some released, others transferred, a few executed in silence. Nashoba was gone. Sadie searched every corner of the camp, questioned every guard she could find, but there was no record, no signature, only a blood-stained shirt left behind in the infirmary, and the ghost of a name whispered into her ear like prayer. Weeks passed. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, the swelling at her belly, the fear that gripped her harder than any war ever had. The townsfolk called her names. They said she had lain with a savage, that she had betrayed her people. Her church turned cold. The baker refused her coin. She delivered the child alone in a rented back room of a miner's boarding house, screaming into a pillow so no one would hear. She named him Isaac, and she swore, holding his tiny hand in hers, that he would never feel ashamed of where he came from, even if the world demanded it. But the world did not make it easy. Mothers pulled their children away when she walked by. Men looked at her with hunger or hatred. No one believed her when she said the father was Cheyenne. No one cared. But each night, she would tell the child stories about a man who sang over broken boys, who fought with bare fists and soft eyes, who had once whispered her name as if it mattered. And as Isaac grew, she wondered every day, was it wrong to come searching, to bring a boy to a man who might have forgotten, to knock on a door in the rain and say, "This is yours"? But war had taken too much, and silence had buried too many truths. She had loved once, and now love had a name, a face, a heartbeat, and he deserved to know. The fire in Nashoba's lodge had burned low, yet sleep refused him. He lay on his mat, with his eyes open, the flickering shadows on the wall dancing like restless spirits. Rain still tapped softly on the hide walls, and though the storm had passed, something heavier remained in the air, like a truth unspoken, pressing against his chest. Winyan slept in the far corner, wrapped in a thick elk-hide blanket embroidered with blue thread. Her breathing was shallow, even, peaceful. She had asked, no, demanded, to stay in his lodge this night, citing the coming ceremony, the expectations of her father, and though they had not yet been joined, her presence was already being spoken of as a done thing, an arrangement sealed by lineage, not by love. He stared at the wooden beam overhead, the same one he had carved into as a boy. The etchings were still there, symbols of migration, of wind and sun, of names now gone. Nothing had changed, and yet nothing felt the same. Sadie's voice still echoed in his ears. "You do not have to believe me, but this boy, he is yours." The boy, Isaac, a name he had never spoken, a child he had never held. He rose quietly, his footsteps soft on the earthen floor. He stepped outside into the crisp air, pulling a fur over his shoulders. The fire pit outside was still warm, embers glowing like forgotten stars. He crouched beside it and fed it a few pieces of dry kindling, watching the flames rise. The village around him was dark, still, but inside him everything churned. He had not asked for this fate, had not sought power or position, but Winyan, proud, relentless Winyan, had chosen him. When her father, the Teospe leader, saw her favoring him, it was decided. No one argued with the daughter of the chief. No one refused the man who had bled for his people. Vunyam was beautiful, sharp-humed, commanding, and determined. She had told him plainly one night, seated beside this very fire, "You will marry me, Nashoba. It is already spoken." He had said nothing, not yes, not no. Silence was permission in the old ways. But now, everything had shifted. Sadie's arrival was not just a disruption, it was a reckoning. He remembered her in fragments, the way her fingers had trembled as they stitched his side, the way she hummed lullabies in a tongue not her own, the fear in her eyes the night he had found her screaming, the softness of her voice the morning after they had shared more than words. He had tried to forget, because remembering had hurt more than silence. But now, the child, his child, was here, real, breathing, bearing his blood. And Winyan, she had seen it too, the way he froze when Sadie appeared, the way his voice changed when he spoke her name. Winyan's pride would not bend. Her place as his promised bride had been too loudly declared, too closely tied to honor. She would not let it be taken without war. And he, Nashoba, son of a hunter, raised in the memory of warriors, he did not want war. Not between women. Not over a boy who had done no wrong. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wedding necklace, hand-carved bone and turquoise beads woven into sinew. It had taken him weeks to finish. Not for love, but for duty. He turned it over in his hand, fingers grazing the smooth surface of the central piece. A bear claw, symbol of guardianship. "Will I be a guardian if I break a promise?" he whispered into the fire. "Or only if I protect what was never allowed to grow?" Above him the sky was clearing, a few stars pushed through the clouds. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Is a man ever truly free to choose who he loves if love comes late? The fire said nothing. But in the dark, the whisper of pine trees seemed to answer. Not free, perhaps, but still responsible. He stayed outside until the chill began to bite through his furs. When he finally stood, the necklace was still in his palm, but his fingers had curled around it, as if holding something far heavier than beads and bone. The makeshift tent Sadie had been given sat on the farthest edge of the encampment, where the trees grew thick and the wind carried the scent of pine and smoke. It was close enough to the river to hear the water at night, but far enough from the center of the village that no one passed by unless they had to. It did not take long for the whispers to begin. By the second day, when Sadie ventured to the well, with Isaac clinging to her skirts, eyes followed her. Women lowered their voices, but did not lower their stares. "She's the white one from the war camps," someone muttered. "The one who claims the child is his." Another voice, sharper. "She comes with lies, a foreign tongue, and a child she cannot prove." Sadie kept her head down, filling her pail. Isaac watched everything with wide, quiet eyes. Later that afternoon, the confrontation came. Vinyan stood at the edge of Sadie's tent, flanked by two other women. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned. "You should not be here," Vinyan said in the tongue of the tribe, then switched to English for cruelty's clarity. "You bring shame. You weave stories to tear down a man's life." Sadie stood in the doorway, back straight, Isaac behind her knees. "I came to tell the truth," she said. Vinyan stepped closer. "You came to destroy a future that was never yours. You had your time. Now it is over." Sadie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. "Not here. Not in front of her son." "Go back to where you belong," Vinyan said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "This is not your land. This is not your tribe." That evening, Sadie sat beside the small fire outside her tent, her son curled in her lap. His cheeks were tear-streaked, his hands clenched into little fists. "They said I was bad," he whispered. "They said I don't belong. They called me bloodless." Sadie stroked his hair, heart aching. "You belong with me," she said, "and I will never let anyone say otherwise." Each day it continued. Children pointed, mothers turned their backs. When Isaac reached for berries one morning at the trading post, another boy slapped his hand away. "Not for half-breeds," he spat. Sadie pulled her son back, blinking hard against the tears. She had known it would be hard, but not this cruel. And still, every night, something small and silent arrived at her doorstep. The first time, it was a handful of wild berries, still cool with dew. The second night, a carved wooden rabbit, smooth and round in a child's grip. On the third, a woven bracelet made of colored thread and sinew, clearly the work of a man who had once been a boy, who carved such things. He never saw who left them, but she knew. Nishoba. He never came close, never stepped past the shadows, but the gifts came with care, with thought, with a longing that needed no name. She would wake to find them and press her fingers to her lips, knowing he had stood outside, watching, waiting, wanting, and still he said nothing. She understood why. The weight of tribe, of duty, of Winyun's voice in his ear like a war drum. But that did not dull the ache. One night, after placing Isaac to sleep, Sadie stepped out into the moonlight and looked toward the woods beyond the firelight. "I see you," she whispered into the dark. But there was no answer. Only the wind. Only the stillness of a man who wanted to reach for what was his, but could not bear to break what was expected. Inside the tent, Isaac turned in his sleep, and Sadie sat alone by the fire, clutching a carved wooden rabbit like it was the last thing tethering her to hope. The sun dipped low over the pine ridge, casting long golden shadows across the village. Children ran between the tents and drying racks, shouting and laughing, except for one voice, sharp and small, that wasn't laughing. "Isaac." Sadie heard it before she saw him, his cry cutting through the quiet like a blade. She dropped the basket in her arms and ran toward the sound, her heart thundering against her ribs. As she rounded the smokehouse, the sight stopped her cold. A circle of boys, older and bigger, stood around her son. Isaac was on the ground, arms up to shield his face. One boy picked up a stone and hurled it, another kicked dust at him. "Half-blood," one shouted, "doesn't belong." "You're not Cheyenne, you're not anything." Sadie's voice tore from her throat. "Stop!" But before she could reach him, someone else moved faster. Nashoba. He surged into the circle like a storm, knocking two boys aside with the flat of his arms. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his body around Isaac, shielding the child from the stones, from the fists, from the hate. His back took a blow, then another, but he didn't move. The boys backed away, eyes wide, breath heaving. Nashoba stood slowly, cradling Isaac in one arm. Blood streaked the child's cheek. Dirt clung to his knees. But his arms were around Nashoba's neck, and his small fingers gripped tightly, as if they had always belonged there. Sadie stood frozen, breath ragged. And then Nashoba turned. The crowd had begun to gather. Women, men, elders. Winyan, standing near the well, eyes fixed on him with a look that held no question, only dawning horror. Nashoba didn't flinch. He looked around, then raised his voice. First in Cheyenne, then again in English. "This child," he said, "is mine." Silence. "He is my blood, my flesh. I do not deny him. I do not hide from what I have made." He looked down at Isaac, whose eyes, wide, amber dark, met his. "He has my eyes," Nashoba said, "and my heart." A murmur rippled through the gathered people. Some nodded, some turned away, but none spoke. Sadie stepped forward, her voice catching. "You didn't have to." "I did," Nashoba said, not looking away from his son. "They would not have stopped, unless someone stood." Then, from the corner of the circle, a sharp intake of breath. "William." She had not moved, but now her hands trembled at her sides. "You would shame me," she said, "before all?" Nashoba turned to her. "You shamed yourself, when you let hate speak louder than truth." She stepped back as if struck. Later that night, Nashoba found a bundle on the ground outside his lodge, wrapped in deerskin, tied with red sinew. Inside, the wedding necklace, the turquoise beads, the bear claw. Her final answer? William was gone by morning. No word, no farewell, only the necklace left behind. And in that silence something shifted in the village. They no longer whispered, because Nashoba had chosen not to hide. And Sadie, for the first time in years, slept with her son curled beside her, no longer carrying the truth alone. In the days that followed, the village held its breath. Some nodded when they passed Sadie, their eyes softer than before. A few even offered her food, a glance of respect. But others turned away, their silence sharper than words. Whispers still traveled, thin, biting, uncertain. "She bewitched him. It is unnatural. He should have chosen one of us." Sadie felt it in the weight of the air, in the way mothers pulled their children close when Isaac walked by, in the way the fire circle never made room for her. The lines were drawn, some blurred, others deep. She bore it quietly, but what tore at her most was not the whispers. It was watching Nashoba, caught between them. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the weariness in his steps. Each conversation with the elders was clipped, each greeting guarded. He stood with her now, yes, but it cost him. One night, she made a decision. Under the quiet hum of insects and distant drums, she folded their few belongings into a sack. Isaac slept beside her, curled around the wooden rabbit Nashoba had carved. She touched his hair, her voice a breath. "We're going," she whispered. He stepped out into the night, but Nashoba was already there. He stood by the fire pit, his back to her, eyes on the stars. He turned when he heard her steps, and his face, so still, so unreadable, softened. "You are leaving." "I have to," she said. "They will never accept us, and you, this is your people. I won't be the reason they turn against you." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You were never the reason." She shook her head. "You stood for me, for him, and I will never forget that. But you live here. You lead here. I cannot stay and make you choose every day between your child and your place." "I already chose," he said. Sadie blinked, breath caught. "I have lost enough," he continued. "I will not lose him, or you, not again." She looked at him, a question in her silence. "I am going to the council," he said, "to the elders, to the ones who still remember what it means to honor not just bloodlines, but the heart. And he did. The next morning Neshoba stood before the elders, gray-haired men and women wrapped in years of memory and law. He bowed his head, not in defeat, but in reverence. "I ask not for pity," he said, voice clear, "but for recognition. This child, Isaac, is mine, not just by blood but by bond. He was not born here, but he is of me, of us. He carries the stories of two peoples. That is not a stain, that is a bridge." Silence followed. Then the eldest among them, a man named Mato, stepped forward. His eyes were clouded, but his voice was strong. "Bring the child." Sadie brought Isaac forward. The boy clung to her hand, wide-eyed but brave. Mato knelt before him. "What name do they call you, little one?" Isaac looked to Sadie. She knelt beside him. "Tell him." "Isaac," he said. Mato nodded. He looked at Neshoba. "What name do you give him?" Neshoba stepped forward, kneeling. "Takala," he said. "Little wolf. Because he came in silence, but walks with strength. Because he was born between two worlds, but carries the howl of both." Mato placed his hand gently on Isaac's head. "Then let it be so," he said. "From this day forward this child is Takala, son of Neshoba, child of two fires." A murmur rippled through the circle, but no one objected. Sadie's eyes brimmed with tears. And Neshoba reached out and lifted Takala into his arms, holding him high as the morning sun broke through the pines. He was no longer a secret, no longer alone. Not a mistake. What a name, and a place, and a future. The valley beyond the river ran quiet, with wind and water. It was a place few ventured, half wild, rimmed with birch trees and red sandstone, but it was where Neshoba had always dreamed of living, and now at last it belonged to them. He and Sadie had built their life by the stream, one stone, one timber, one breath at a time. The cabin was small but warm. He carved each beam himself, sanded every edge. Sadie planted herbs by the window, while Takala chased birds barefoot through the grass, his laughter ringing like the songs of spring. Behind the cabin, a single young maple tree took root, its leaves already flickering gold in the wind. Beside it, a windmill spun slow and steady, cut from wood and bone, whispering through the valley like a soft promise. They were here, and they were staying. Some days they saw no one but deer and birds. But then, little by little, the people came. A woman left a bundle of dried berries at their door. An elder brought cloth dyed with red root and indigo. A child arrived shyly, with salve for bruises, and said, "My mother made this." Sadie wept quietly the first time it happened. Neshoba only held her hand and said nothing. Then, one morning, Takala found a small pouch tied with sinew by the foot of the maple tree. Inside were 3 glass beads, green, yellow, and sky blue, and a tiny carved feather. Sadie turned it over in her hands. "It is from her," she said softly. "Winyan." Neshoba nodded. "She speaks through what is left behind." Sadie smiled faintly. "Then maybe it is forgiveness. Or letting go?" They sat on the cabin step as the sun dipped low, its gold brushing the peaks above. Takala ran down by the stream, his feet splashing the shallows. Sadie leaned into Neshoba's shoulder, watching the boy skip stones. "He's strong," she said. Nelson shook his head. "He is ours." Then came her question, gentle but sharp in the quiet. "Do you regret it?" He turned to her. "Giving it up. The path, the place you held. Do you ever miss it?" He looked past the trees, toward the village he had once walked like a son of warriors, the fires he had once tended, the names he had once answered to, with pride. "No," he said. Then he reached for her hand and pulled her close, his arm wrapping around both her and the child who now ran back toward them, soaked in laughing. "Love should not live in the shadows," he said. "It deserves the daylight." Sadie rested her head against his chest, her eyes closed. And as the wind whispered through the valley and the maple tree swayed with a new season's breath, they sat together in peace, not as rumor, not as warning, but as choice. And they chose this. Each other. Again and again. The wind moved softly through the trees, curling through the valley like a song half remembered. The maple tree behind the cabin was tall now, its branches a canopy of flame-colored leaves that rustled like whispers from long ago. Under its shade, children sat cross-legged, their eyes wide, listening. Takala stood before them, not a boy anymore, but a young man with strong shoulders, dark hair tied back, and eyes that carried the calm weight of two worlds. His voice was steady but gentle. My father was a warrior, not because he fought with blades, but because he chose peace when it would have been easier to turn away. My mother was not of this tribe, but she walked into it carrying truth like a torch. They were told it was impossible, that they did not belong, but they stayed, and because they stayed, so did I. A small girl raised her hand. "Were you scared?" she asked. Takala smiled. "I was, but they never were." The children leaned in closer. He continued, telling them about the stormy night his mother had knocked on the door with a secret in her arms, about the boy who had no place, and the man who stood in front of stones and shouted his name. In the doorway of the cabin, Sadie watched from a distance, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes soft with memory. She turned when she heard a familiar step behind her. Neshoba. His hair was streaked with gray now, but his eyes held the same fire she had first seen so many years ago behind prison wire and cedar smoke. He took her hand in his without words. They walked together past the garden she had planted, past the stream where Tokala once chased birds, into the forest trail that wound through birch and pine. The air smelled of earth and sky. Their steps were slow but sure. The windmill still turned. The maple still stood. Their hands were still clasped. As they passed beneath the tall trees, their shadows stretched long across the path, side by side. Sadie's voice came like a hush, a thought spoken not aloud but remembered, etched in the wind. "If anyone asks why I knocked on his door in the rain that night." She paused, the memory flickering behind her eyes. "It's because I knew some loves do not come to ask permission." She smiled. "They come to live." And the forest, the stream, and the mountain sky bore witness, like they always had, to a love not written in history books, but carried in footsteps, laughter, and the hearts of those brave enough to choose it. Thank you for journeying with us through the rain, through the war-torn memories, and through the quiet courage of a love that refused to fade. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in second chances, in silent bravery, in the power of standing up for love, then there are more stories waiting for you here. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable tales of devotion, resilience, and romance set against the untamed beauty of the American frontier, where every sunset holds a secret and every heart has a story worth telling. Until next time, partner, keep believing in the kind of love that doesn't ask permission. It just lives.